Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. Thanks to each of you for coming to talk to us about these important issues today. Mr. O'Mara, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
1 week ago today, on June 18th, 2019, your foundation posted an article that made the argument that LWCF funding should be full, it should be mandatory, and it should be made permanent. One of the core assumptions, I think, that is underlying that assertion within your article is the position that the LWCF is funded, quote, at no cost to the taxpayers. This just isn't true. While I acknowledge that oil and gas revenues may fund a portion of the LWCF, I also have to stress that these revenues are paid for by hardworking Americans who depend on oil and gas every single day and who pay for it. They rely on that as an energy source, and so it's not as though it's free. And then, in addition to this, every single dollar that is siphoned away from the Treasury for the LWCF is $1 less for other programs, programs that are supported by Democrats and Republicans alike in both houses of Congress. In addition to this, when those dollars are used for purchasing additional federal land, that in turn results in the existence of less other land, other non-federal land, whether it's private land owned by an individual or by a corporation, or in some cases, like the State Institutional Trust Lands Administration in Utah, state-owned land that is designed to bring in revenue so as to support a public education system. Every time that happens, that puts additional strain on local communities because it reduces their tax base. You're taking out land that they can no longer tax. It can no longer be put to productive use in most circumstances, so they can't tax it. And so that puts an additional strain on other programs such as a program known as PILT, which stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes. All of these are consequences, and they are certainly things that can be described as costs to the taxpayers. So I want to ask you a couple of questions about this. First, are you familiar with PILT?
Yes.
So you're familiar with the fact that the PILT program purports to reimburse local taxing authorities, generally counties, in public land states. And I'm somewhat envious of some of my colleagues who acknowledge that they don't have much, if any, federal land in their state. It's great to have national parks. There are some federal lands that we depend on for recreation and other purposes, and they're wonderful. In some counties in Utah, we've got in excess of 90%, in some counties in excess of 95% of the land that's owned by the federal government, meaning it's not subject to taxation. Most of the time it can't be developed without a mother may I from the federal government. As a result, the tax revenue doesn't come in, and it puts a strain on our ability to fund everything from schools to fire suppression to search and rescue, all of which are made more difficult by that. I assume you wouldn't tell those communities that LWCF doesn't cost a dime when they're getting paid pennies on the dollar through PILT for what they could be paid if they were able to tax that land, even at their lowest Greenbelt rate.
So the premise of the program originally was fairly simple, right? If we're going to take value out of the land, of a public resource, mainly off the coast of Louisiana, we're going to put value back in to land, and that the royalties would be paid regardless, and that therefore a portion of that should go back to have the nexus with conservation because that's where the impact is. Now, a lot of the lands that have been conserved do allow working forests, allow ranching, allow different types of agriculture activities. And a lot of communities do benefit from the economic activity in the form of hotels nights and restaurant stays, restaurant meals and different retailers. But we would love to work with you to make sure that we find ways to bolster these local economies in strong ways. We just think that having conserved assets that drive tourism and drive additional recreation activities is a great way to support economic development in communities across the country.
But so do you acknowledge that the use of federal revenues for additional land acquisition under LWCF does in fact deplete the dollars available for other programs that might be impacting the nation at large, while most of the LWCF dollars may be spent and focused in the West?
Yes, and I also believe, though, that if a public resource is being depleted, that for a private gain, for the most part, that some of that money should go back towards conservation to make sure that we're mitigating the impact we had on the landscape.
Fair enough, and I see my time's expired, Madam Chair, but I just want to respond to that by pointing out that I don't disagree in the abstract with that statement, but at a time when we've got an enormous backlog, an enormous federal estate amounting to about 30% of the land mass in the United States, and that's hurting a lot of the rural communities disproportionately in certain states like mine, where people don't have a tax base, they don't even have a job base anymore because of restrictions attached to that land and because of the fact that they can't tax it and it can't be used for most things. You add to that the fact that they also have a huge, staggering backlog for maintenance of those lands. It begs the question in my mind whether this really is the best use of these dollars, to buy more land rather than taking care of the land we already own. Thank you.